wouldn't mind just recapping your view.
Let me do a very
in terms of Israel's kind of recent activity. You view them as morally wrong. You think that what Israel's doing, I don't mean to generalize, but it's not the moral position. You think it's morally wrong. Is that can you maybe elaborate just for 30 seconds? And then I want to let Doran respond.
Sure. So there are moral considerations. As a Jew, I have some interest in Israel that defines itself as a Jewish state behaving in a moral way, but I don't necessarily expect by default that a state in the world will behave simply in a moral way. I think there's geopolitics that affect the way states behave, and I think that I see Israel behaving in a way that when people talk about October 7th as like the 9/11 for Israel in terms of what 9/11 was for America, I look at the aftermath of American foreign policy and our illegal and based on lies invasion of Iraq and I think something like 100,000 Iraqi civilians that were killed in the course of that war, and the loss of America's view as a moral nation, and our loss of our allies being with us after that. And I can see the same thing happening, and could happen even more severely with Israel if it stays on this course. So as an American, I would caution the kind of retaliatory response to a really bad event like October 7th. I would say to be cautious.
Doran, your thoughts?
Okay, so what I've heard basically is I've heard two parts, two arguments essentially. The first argument is almost as an Israeli, because what he said, he could also have said as an Israeli, the first part at least, that it's basically political disagreement. He doesn't like what some of the people in the government are saying. He doesn't like what some of the members of Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, are saying. So I really don't take much issue with that. I'm not that interested in Israeli politics. I think it's completely fair. You don't like this side of the political map, fine. You don't like that side, fine. That's basically a political statement. So I'm not really interested in that. And I see him nodding. Is that because I got that about right in your estimation?
Yeah, I would say you got that about right. So I'd be curious to hear.
Wait, I have the second part of your argument.
Please, go
okay,
ahead.
so the second part of your argument is something that we can probably find some disagreement and discuss. Mm-hmm. And the second part of your argument was basically that it's also political, but we can discuss it. The second part of your argument was basically that the policy that Israel is pursuing in response to October 7th is the wrong policy for it to pursue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's your point of view. Like so again, you're almost speaking as an Israeli, because you're saying like this is not what we should be doing.
An additional element, which is that as an American, as a Jew, as a citizen of the world, I would say that from the outside as well, I see that what Israel is doing is wrong, and I oppose that. So I would say both internally and externally, but I would say what the policy is wrong.
So can I try to? Well, okay. So here's the thing. I'm not going to try to nitpick justifications. Like I'm not going to pick specific cases and say this was right or this was wrong.
Sure.
I'm going to try and look at the entire geopolitical picture, because of course, naturally, there's a war. Even if Israel has an organized army and it has rules, there will be war crimes, right? I mean, there will be soldiers who, despite being told not to wreck civilian homes, will go into a civilian home, videotape it, put it on TikTok about how they're smashing furniture and whatnot. So I'm going to ignore these. Like, I don't like these, but because these are not like I believe, not part of the broader Israeli plan. I'm not going to address specific occasions. Okay.
So that's something that I actually do have a disagreement with. I
Okay.
don't believe that that's just a consistent kind of, oh, this is just a thing that happens. I think there really are significant differences between the ways that different armies for different nations behave in different contexts, that this isn't just a kind of chaos of war, stuff just happens. So when even in as I was just describing, the terrible things that happened in Iraq with America's invasion, in specific instances where American soldiers were shown to have acted counter to the Geneva Conventions, to the kind of procedures of war, those soldiers were held accountable, and America attempted at least to push back against this as.
But so does it. So does Israel, though. So does the IDF.
I haven't seen instances of that. I'm not sure if that's
so. First of all, I can tell you, like, broadly right now, there's a lot of talk about do not use graffiti on walls in Gaza. Do not shoot things and upload them. Do not loot civilian homes. Do not break private property. So yeah, these are directives given from the army. And also there's the famous case, you might have heard of it. There was the El-Or Azaria case. I think it happened, I don't know, maybe like almost 10 years ago, in which an Israeli soldier, basically there was a terrorist, he was trying to stab some soldiers and they shot him and he lay on the ground and he was wounded. And they were going to, of course, treat him and arrest him because that's protocol. And one of the soldiers, he was like, okay, this guy tried to kill my friend. He tried to kill me. So he simply cocked his rifle and shot him on the spot. And he was jailed for it. And there was like a huge, it did lead to some political strife within Israeli society. But it did happen. There are rules in the IDF that you have to follow. So
sure.
I don't think it's there are laws of war that you have to follow, and Israel sees itself as having to follow these laws of war. Would they always follow them? Maybe if they can get away with something that they have strategic interest in doing, they will try to get away with it. But broadly speaking, and of course due to American influence, I believe that the IDF does try to keep to the laws of war. And also, if I may go back to the things you've said about Iraq, there's a substantial difference, I believe, between Iraq, the invasion of Iraq as a response to 9/11, and the invasion of Gaza as a response to October 7th. There are actually several differences which we can discuss, but broadly, just some few obvious ones that come at the top of my head. One, where the attack obviously originated from Gaza and from the governing body, the body that governs Gaza, right? So that's, I think, a pretty big deal, because even if you bought the lies that said that Iraq was basically, behind 9/11, even if you bought that, you would still not see it as, well, it's a direct attack from Iraq, right? So that's a pretty big difference. Another big difference is the difference and the threat of reoccurrences. And another difference, I believe, is that unlike Al-Qaeda, Hamas is part of a geopolitical alliance which intends and believes that it is able to flat out destroy Israel. Like legit destroy it. Like when Hamas went on the 7th of October, in the weeks following the event, they have a newspaper. It's called Palestine, basically in Arabic, and it's widespread in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And basically, they kept talking about how they called it Operation the End of Days. If I were to translate it roughly into English, it's coming. It's it's close, and Hezbollah will join, and Syria, the Syrian militias will join, and Iran will join, and the Arabs from the West Bank will join, and the Arabs from the interior, that's what they call it, like the Arabs, the Israeli Arabs, basically. The Arabs of the interior, they will also join. They will all join. We will do it together, and we will. The days of the Zionist entity are numbered. There are like hundreds of clips and opinion pieces talking about that, how it's so close. And when on the 7th of October, Mohammed Deif, who is basically the leader of Al-Qassam Brigade, it's the name of. Like the IDF is the name of the Israeli army, Al-Qassam Brigade is the name of the Hamas army. He called right when the attack started and people were going out in the street and shouting Allahu Akbar, even in the West Bank. He called on everyone to launch the attack now. This is the time to destroy the Zionist entity. Like it was really a thing that was planned and happening. And I personally believe that it could have been possible. It was possible to destroy Israel on the 7th of October, like to end it as a political entity. And by the way, a few of these papers and the expert meetings that they have like this list. It's so interesting to read about like the plan. What do you do after the successful end of days operation? What do you do with the Jewish engineers and doctors? What do you do with the civilians? What do you do with these people? What do you do with like it was a plan that was made and ready to execute. And I think it's very different from Iraq. Now, I do agree with you.
Sure.
That
Can I,
yeah, sure. I spoke for quite a while.
So just in the interest of time of being as discussing the specific areas of disagreement. So my example or my comparison from October 7th to 9/11 is not necessarily to talk about justification, but almost as a friendly piece of advice from an American to Israel, to Israelis. In this circumstance, because Israelis, or Americans are supportive of the Israeli bombing of Gaza, to say, we have this event that we felt we were very justified in going out and toppling a government, and it turned out to be the very wrong thing. Maybe you feel that you're much more justified than we were. Maybe you are, right? But just to take a moment to consider, maybe this is not the right course of action in the heat of the moment, where you feel like you have the right and the imperative to go out and to destroy this government, maybe to destroy this people, because there are people in Israel, there are people in the Israeli government who feel this is not just Hamas, this is all Gazans, this is maybe all Palestinians. And then to maybe shift this to a slightly broader thing, the reason that the October 7th attack was successful was because, I don't know, maybe you know the accurate number, something like 80%, 85% of the IDF was actually on the West Bank border or within the West Bank and doing security there, rather than a kind of skeleton crew that was actually guarding the Gaza border. So I think this thing that always comes up of security versus niceness or something for Israel. Are we going to be kind to the Palestinians, or will we enforce security? It seems like in this massive instance where you're saying perhaps the state of Israel as a political entity was on the line, that the fact that these settlements in the West Bank, which are illegal, which are supported by a minority of Israelis, which are generally the most kind of extreme religious, the religious Zionist party that includes some of these people who are themselves settlers, these people who are very, very invested in pushing the borders of Israel into the West Bank, is not something that all Israelis are interested in. But in this circumstance, the security of Israel was threatened by this, I don't know how you refer to whatever this project is, this extremist Zionist project or whatever, that wants this like Eretz Israel, that wants like all of the West Bank to be part of Israel. But this project itself that is taking away the rights of Palestinians, that directly removed the security from Israel. So I think that's a thing that is not in the conversation, I think, in the way that it needs to be. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, again, it's a political disagreement. So I think, like, because I'm not a really political person, I'm going to try to just bring up some thoughts, because I do think that some of the things you've said there were wrong, but not for political reasons, for other reasons. So yeah, it's a political disagreement. An Israeli leftist could say the exact same things that you've just said. So I don't, I wouldn't debate an Israeli leftist. I would debate someone who thinks that Israel is like fundamentally illegitimate. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. You've said that, and it's also a narrative within Israeli society, mostly on the left, but not only, that one of the reasons for October 7th was that the army was basically busy with the West Bank and with the settlements. Now, it's true that a lot of the army was in the West Bank at the time. I don't know exactly how much. You said 80%. I don't want to name numbers, because it's kind of funny to do that, because so much of the IDF's force is reservists who are not even drafted at the time, right? Conscripted, more correct to say. So here's the thing, though. The reason for October 7th was not because the IDF was not on the Gaza border. Because, the IDF could have been on the Gaza border on October 7th, and then they would have just waited for some other time in which it wasn't on the Gaza border, So it's not really fundamentally the reason. The reason is intelligence failure, right? That's the fundamental reason. It's intelligence failure. It's what they call in Israel the hakonceptia, the conception, literally translated into English, in which basically the Israeli government conceived of the Gazans and of Hamas as a body that's basically heading towards some kind of long-term arrangements, maybe give them some economic concessions, and maybe try to calm this whole thing down while we deal with the Saudis and stuff like that. And that kind of blew up in their face, and they were so sure. They were so sure in their own behavior that they didn't even bother to look what Hamas was saying, because Hamas was saying what it intended to do and what it was going to do. And if you read their newspapers in the weeks and months coming up to October 7th, you think to yourself, "What the hell? How could they miss this?" So essentially. I don't disagree that there was a problem, of course, but the reason is not the West Bank. By the way, what I just said, it does not follow from what I've said that the settlements are a good thing, right? I'm just saying that the reason for October 7th was not the West Bank.
Right. I mean, so these things could both be true, that perhaps if the intelligence had been better, then the IDF would have said, okay, well, whatever, we want soldiers in the West Bank, but on this particular date, we're going to move them back over to the Gaza border, and then that would have been taken care of. But it is a fact that because of the settlements, the vast majority of the Israeli army that was currently active was in the West Bank, or on the border of the West Bank, rather than on the border with Gaza. And if they had not been guarding those illegal settlements, then they would have been guarding the Gaza border, and October 7th would not have occurred. So I don't necessarily want to spend too much time quibbling over, this is the proximate
No,
reason.
I think we can. I think we can talk about that, because it's interesting. It's actually a debate, literally. So it makes me think. It's a good thing. So, because here's the thing: let's imagine a world in which there were no settlements in the West Bank. Mm-hmm. Okay, in that case, the West Bank kind of looks like Gaza. Because Gaza had settlements, and then the Israelis had the settlements pulled out. Now, there is a weakness in the argument I've just put forth, which I will show shortly, right? But I think there is some case to be made that, definitely this is a very strong feeling in Israel today that, well, we will never pull out the settlements because we saw what happened when we pulled out of Gaza. We got Hamas. And in the West Bank, Hamas is also the most popular political party. It's illegal, but it's extremely popular. Like, you know how you would have mock elections in the campus of the universities and stuff like that. Hamas would always will still always win.
Wait, so just to highlight that point, so this concept that you're describing is basically to say, if Israel didn't have, if the Israeli army wasn't supporting settlements that are illegal according to international law, that are splitting up the West Bank into Bantustans, that are creating an apartheid situation in the West Bank that makes things very painful, very humiliating, going from checkpoint to checkpoint, to go from one part of the West Bank to another, that settlers are constantly burning crops, setting fires, shooting at Palestinians in the West Bank. If those settlements were pulled out, then Palestinians in the West Bank would radicalize further?
No, they will not radicalize further. It's that their current radicalization would just replace the ruling regime, which is supported by Israel. Now, it's just a thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just explain? Like, there's some logical pieces of that I don't want to guess what your thoughts are there.
No. Okay. So can I first show the weakness in what I've just said, because and then we can maybe think together about this. Okay. The weakness in what I've just said is that, so essentially the argument is that if you want security, you need to control the land, and if you want to control the land, you need to have population on the land. That's basically the argument. I do see some merits in it. However, well, I guess that there are some merits in it, because if you were to say, okay, we want security from Lebanon, then you would occupy Lebanon militarily, but Hezbollah would still build itself, right? Because you wouldn't have you wouldn't have Jewish Israeli civilians basically living there. That's the way to create security in a sense. That's the argument. I can't say that I'm crazy about that argument, but I do see some merit in it.
So what do you actually believe? Because just to state first my perspective, and then see what you have that kind of matches against that. For me, this concept of we can have security as long as we have our boot securely placed against their neck. As long as they can't stand up because we're standing on them, as long as we have enough soldiers, we have enough checkpoints, enough walls, keeping them penned in, as long as we bomb their infrastructure enough that they can't build anything that they could use to attack us with, as long as we keep doing that, then we will be safe. To me, that's fundamentally a losing strategy.
To me, it isn't.
Okay.
I mean, I would remove the last part of what you've said about bombing them every once in a while, right? Mm-hmm. I would remove that, but I would say that, when you have power over a hostile population, basically, as long as there is belligerence, an occupation should continue. I think also that's international law, by the way. Sure.
Do you believe that? So to state the rest of my position in terms of the positive case, I'm not so naive to say, well, if you take away all the walls, suddenly this population that hates you because of what you've done to them will suddenly stop hating you, and it'll suddenly become a paradise, and everybody will live in peace, and everything will be wonderful. I'm not saying that. I want to be clear. But in order to move to a situation with real peace, real security, and yes, justice is also important, then you have to normalize relations. You have to move toward living together as equals. You need to give people back dignity and human rights and self-autonomy. And that's the only way forward toward lasting peace. And if a group of people says, we will keep our foot on their neck until they simply stop resisting, my interpretation of that statement is to say, we will keep our foot on their neck until they die. That's my interpretation of what that says. Because if you say we will never give them dignity, human rights, until they simply become utterly passive, to me, the clear interpretation is ethnic cleansing or genocide or something like that. If you say, I have no plan to ever move toward peace or justice until they're just utterly passive.
Okay, so a couple of things about that. First off, about the okay, I'll start at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that you said basically you have no intention of ever removing your boot from their neck. I would love for Israel to remove its boot from their necks, but I do think that there needs to be some radical reform. And when I say radical, I mean extreme. I don't mean necessarily like Islamist. A radical reform within Palestinian society in order to enable that, because right now, from what I see in the papers, in the the widespread opinions, it's basically you can't. Resistance is such a value, and martyrdom is such a value in there that you just can't do that. That would be suicide. How do you reform a society? I have no idea. Especially when they keep being egged on by the rest of the Muslim world, right? So that's about that. I can't give you a solution, but I know what is the wrong solution. I think the wrong solution is let's kumbaya, which you've also kind of said yourself. Now, as for the other thing, here's the problem with the main with the belief that their lives are miserable, they'll resist, they'll do whatever, and I think really what you would have to do in order to debunk that view is to imagine a world in which there is no occupation and see what happens. But luckily, you have several years of Israel's existence, right, without occupation, and you see what happens. So you have basically, here's the thing: the Arab narrative is always feels like victory is imminent. That's basically October 7th, right? Victory is imminent. We're destroying the Zionist entity now. This is the end days, right? But it's also been the narrative in 48, right? Why did the civil war start in 47? Because the Arabs believed that they could remove the Jews and abolish the Zionist idea. There was no occupation then, right? Now, I'm not saying that sins of the fathers, right? You don't inherit the sins of your fathers, but in a certain way, you also kind of do, because the Palestinians of today, which I don't like this, by the way, they're still paying for the absolute failures of their leaderships, successive leaderships in the past 75 years or more, actually, right? And even before the partition plan, there were conspiracy theories against the Jews or trying to take over Al-Aqsa Mosque, for example. That's what caused the Hebron massacre of 1929. So it's not just the occupation. There's this fundamental hostility. I've spoken to an American Muslim a couple of days ago when he told me something interesting. He told me that that there's this thing about the Palestinians, that when they need to unleash Islam, they crack it open a little bit and then they close it when it fits them, right? So there's this. They know how to inspire this worldwide religious fervor. And then they feel like victory is imminent. They start a war to destroy Israel, and then they lose badly. And what do? They get the Nakba, or they get what's happening today in Gaza. So I really, it's not that I like it. I don't want to destroy anyone's lives, but I don't think Israel should commit suicide by essentially, turning the other cheek.
So, from your perspective, is there anything that Israel could do to improve relations between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, I'm so glad.
I haven't heard anything, but
I'm so glad you've asked that. I'm so glad that you asked that. Yes, I do believe that Israel is missing something big time. They're not many. They're very few, but there are Palestinian reformist voices. They're small, they're far in between, but they exist. And Israel, I think, should embrace them instead of silencing them. So that's how I see it. There are voices being heard. These people, unfortunately, they won't talk to me, or when they talk to me, they would hide their faces because it's dangerous in the Palestinian territories to talk like that, but in a conciliatory manner. But yes, so I do think that there are things that Israel should do, because I don't see like a Palestinian state in the foreseeable future ever being anything other than suicide for Israel, right? But if we were to imagine a situation in which, the old hatred of the old generations is dead because these generations are dead, and the new generations, they can get along and they can do business and whatever, there shouldn't really be any difference, if you have the people who are today settlers, they can live in Palestine. Who cares? It's like French people living in Brussels. Who cares? So who cares that they're living in Belgium? That's what I mean.
Yeah, or
right, for them
living in like Algeria or something, right? I guess.
Yeah. But Algeria, it's not exactly okay. Yeah, but Algeria is more different than to France than Belgium is. But my point is, there's actually a lot of commonalities between Jews and Muslims. A lot of commonalities, and when I speak to Muslims, I find that out. But the conversation, and it exists to a certain extent on the Israeli side, but it's unimaginably worse on the Palestinian side, that the power is held by the people who would never say these things, and who would never be conciliatory, and who would never try to challenge the narrative of, guys, maybe we were being idiots here. Maybe this was actually something that we should have done. It's always, you start a war with the intention of annihilating the Zionist state, and then when you lose, you oh my God, the Nakba, what did they do to us? Oh my God, look at Gaza. It's kind of absurd, but it was a great question. So thanks for asking.
So propping up more moderate Palestinian leaders. This is actually not a leading question, but just a totally genuine question. What do you think about Marwan Barghouti, who the former Shin Bet leader said he could be the kind of Palestinian Mandela? We should free him from jail. He's somebody who could compete politically against Hamas, who's both popular with Palestinians and also could be a moderate reforming voice.
Yeah.
So I don't have a strong opinion that this isn't.
So I'm not entirely sure who that guy is, but I think I recognize the name. I think it's a disgrace that the Shin Bet guy said such a thing.
Why is that?
Because if I remember correctly, this guy is he planned several terrorist attacks. He was active in I don't think you can go.
Sure.
Okay. When I was speaking about Palestinian reformed voices, I was thinking about people I don't exactly remember the names, but I think there's this guy called, is it Hamza Youssef? No, that's the Scotland Prime Minister, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure, but I mean, who is it? Who's the Israeli minister? Is it Smotrich or Ben Gvir, who is the
minister of what?
Smotrich is the finance minister. Yeah. Ben Gvir is minister of national security. I think Ben Gvir, right, who was convicted of terrorism by Israel.
Yeah, but it's right, it's not the same. It's not the same. The terrorism because it's different. Okay. It's different. I don't like Israeli terrorists. Okay. Let's make this clear. But it's a different thing to say I'm going to plan some sort of crazy operation to, I don't know, scare Palestinians or whatever. It's not the same scale of terrorist activities as planning a suicide bombing on a bus.
Sure.
So it's not the same.
So he's a big fan of his ideology is basically modeled after, I'm trying to remember his name.
It's Meir Kahane.
Yeah. Kahane, who shot the Israeli prime minister. So that's
no. That's Yigal Amir.
That's Amir. Okay.
But Kahana, Kahana headed basically a radical Jewish party.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in the 70s. I might be wrong, but around that time.
So who are these moderate leaders then that you think should be proper?
Oh, they're not leaders. That's the thing.
Okay.
That's the problem. They're not leaders, but there are voices. As far as I'm concerned, okay, what I'm saying here obviously has some problems, because in the Palestinian territories, if you're suspected of collaborating with Israel, they will lynch you pretty much on the spot. Like, I think in the first Intifada, I think that more Palestinians killed more Palestinians than Jews, because they suspect them of collaboration, and it's like a very bad atmosphere. So it probably couldn't. There would need to be some sophistication to it. I don't know. Like, I haven't thought of it that deeply, but there are people, as far as I'm concerned, any person who you see a video of him on TikTok saying something like, "Why does Hamas do that? What we should be doing is actually this," and it's something that Israel could actually live with. Israel should check out, what is this guy thinking? Sure. Maybe we should help him be heard.
Isn't this the critical thing? So if I ask to somebody who's in conflict with someone else, and I ask, okay, you guys have a conflict, you say you want to resolve it and you're serious about resolving it. Okay, that's wonderful. It would be great to have peace between the two of you so that you don't kill each other, or one of you doesn't kill the other. Obviously, that's the right thing to do. But if I ask, what can you do on your end to reform? If the answer is, well, the other guy needs to reform before I can do anything, there's nothing on my end, I think most people would say this is not a satisfactory answer. You're not serious about peace. So I think this is the critical thing then to think about, because if you're Israeli, if you're supportive of Israel, to the detriment of being supportive of Palestinians, if your focus is on support for Israel, and you see yourself aligned with Israel, you relate to Israel, you don't relate to Palestinians, okay, that's great. It's fine. You don't have to be relating to everybody all the time. But if you relate to Israel, if you're Israeli, and you say, we're serious about peace, we're serious about justice, we want things to improve, then surely the only thing that matters is, what can I do from my side to improve the situation? If you say it's all on them to totally change before I could ever conceive of doing anything, then I think it's reasonable for me to say, well, I don't think you're serious about this, right? Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's a great objection. I'll try to answer it. I think that because Israel is a democratic and open society, it would be easier to create gradual changes of opinion and of public opinion, right? Basically reform, right? I mean, you don't really need reform in a democratic society. You know what I mean? Like, something will happen and it will kind of leak into the public conscious, theoretically, right? But so what I would say is that because Israeli society is open and it debates and it discusses, I would expect that if the Palestinians would change their tones into something that is more in alignment with something that the Israelis could live with, I would expect to see a change in Israeli tone, just as, by the way, whenever Hamas has acted violently in the past, there has been a change in Israeli tone in the opposite direction, right?
Doran, you're saying that it's up to the Palestinians to change their tone before Israel can change anything.
Okay, well, actually, so yes, but I think Israel could somehow help that process along.
So I think so what you're saying in terms of propping up moderate voices, I think that makes sense. I think that's a reasonable stance. But I think for me, this idea that it's like, well, maybe this is something I guess theoretically we could do. I'm not quite sure. It's a vague idea. I haven't really thought it through. Shouldn't that be something? I don't mean you personally, Doran, individually, that this is on you exactly to figure this out for Israel. But isn't this the whole thing? Is it for Israel to say, we want to resolve this? Shouldn't they be at least working on a plan? And if they say, well, we don't really have like a concrete idea, I haven't thought about it that much.
So I'll be honest with you. I think I can't prove it. I'm just saying what I think. Okay. I think that Israel actually was trying to do it. I think that Netanyahu was trying to do it, but he could never say it out loud because of he's associated with the right wing and his and also his political partners. I think that normalization with the Saudis would have probably meant some Gulf state force or help with administration and some sort of reform to the PA. I mean, Gaza is out of your control. Well, now it wouldn't be out of your control, but pre-October 7th, it was out of your control. So I think Israeli actually was trying to achieve something like this. And I think the reason why, all the Qatari money that went into Gaza and all the things that went behind everyone's back with the Gulf states, I think that Israel was eventually
the money that Netanyahu got to go to Hamas. From Qatar,
yes, I believe that Netanyahu. Well, it exploded in his face, right? But I believe that Netanyahu believed that he was going for some long-term maneuver that would first bypass the Palestinian problem and then solve it after Israel has normalized relations and not just normalized, but also instituted a good business partnership with the Gulf states. That's what I think he was trying to do. And I think he wanted it to be his legacy. And well, now it's going to have a different legacy.
I mean, there's always two camps. When things are hardest, there's people who say peace is now unachievable in this moment because things are so bad, because tensions are so high, because conflict is so high, violence is so high. There's nothing that can be done. We have to wait for a better season for peace. And there's other voices that say, because things are so bad right now, we must find peace. So there's an idea that, so if you look at, and I don't want to go too much into the details because we're nearing maybe the end of our time. We can stay a little bit after the hour, but first Intifada, relatively nonviolent expression of we want
at the start. At the
start. Second Intifada, very bloody, very violent, and what changed is that the peace talks fell through. The hope of a new, better, permanent situation being achieved between Israel and Palestinians, some kind of Palestinian state, that hope was dashed, fell through. There's a hopeful view that a hope for a better situation, a better setup, a better arrangement for all people, if that's achievable, that's something for people to look to put their hopes into, and rather than thinking about just resistance and agitation for recognition and to say the situation is unlivable, because that's what these acts are. It's an expression of this is intolerable, this is unlivable. I would rather carry out a suicide bombing than continue to live in this situation. That's an expression that things are unlivable. But the hope that things genuinely can change, I see that as the only thing that can meaningfully impact what's happening right now and give people a different thing to focus on. I can't imagine that you disagree with that. I know that you have concerns. I know that you have security concerns. I know that you have maybe some lack of hope that can be achieved right now.
I actually disagree with the narrative that you've presented.
Okay, what's your disagreement with that?
So you've essentially said you've presented the idea that the second Intifada was bloodier than the first because of the failure of the peace talks. But it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation, because the peace talks failed. Hamas took it upon themselves not just Hamas, the radical Islamist organizations, but I'll say Hamas because it's easier. It's less words. Hamas basically took it upon themselves to derail the peace talks, okay? And they have gained political power in between the first Intifada and the second. Now, you could say the reason that Hamas has gained power is the failure of the peace talks, okay? But you could also say the reason that the peace talks failed is that Hamas has gained power and carried out violent attacks, right? So it's kind of a two-way street there.
Sure,
I wouldn't
of course.
quick to lay the responsibility at the feet of the peace talks, and even if you were to lay the responsibility at the feet of the peace talks, then that wouldn't necessarily mean that the fault is with the Israelis.
No,
so
I
that's
wouldn't say that. I wasn't trying to make some purely partisan point that obviously they failed because of the Israelis. Just a really modest point.
So that's number one, but there's also number two.
Leading to violence.
Okay, because you've spoken about, if you were to have hope, then the behavior would change. Okay, but that's also a two-way street, because the part of the Israeli public believes, a pretty large part, after October 7th, actually believes that it's true that hope moves people into action, but it's not always positive action. As I've stated earlier in this conversation, there is this Palestinian narrative in which the Zionist entity is so close to be destroyed. All we need to do is to resist a little bit more. The Zionists are fleeing to the airports. They just want to flee. So we're still close to that, and that's also hope. But that's hope that works in the opposite direction.
Sure.
So another Israeli response will be, well, if you want them to stop acting, what you need is to extinguish their hope of, so that argument about hope is like, it can work both ways. You extinguish their hope to remove the Zionist entity, and maybe then we can establish hope to discuss, okay, so what is going to be the arrangement here exactly so that people can live good lives. And more, you've said the situation is intolerable, stuff like that. But I guess I don't want to, it's been talked to death, but about the amount of financial help that these organizations have gotten, and it doesn't reach the people. So, they could have actually lived better lives. I do agree that some of that is, of course, on the Israelis, but a lot of that is due to failed Palestinian leadership, and also failed Palestinian beliefs, because the leadership is basically feeding on the belief, and the belief is that you need to destroy the Zionist entity, and that's where our resources should be going, not to improve your lives, right? Because you're going to have an either way.
So this is something that I've heard. So that the basic point is, all this money from international organizations or governments in Europe goes to Gazans, but it goes through Hamas, and they spend it on rockets and terror tunnels, whatever, instead of infrastructure. It's
also the West Bank. Well, yeah, but it's also in the West Bank. It's like extremely corrupt. Okay. It's like the thought of like, it's more important to resist right now than it is to lead good lives, because actually what matters is the afterlife, basically, right? How do you say in Arabic, my brother died from the Israeli bombing yesterday? You would say my brother became a shaheed, a martyr, basically. Sure. He went to heaven to witness the glory of God, right? Mm-hmm. Shaheed means witness.
Yeah. So I was curious about this, and I was trying to substantiate this point one way or another, or at least get some kind of breakdown of like what amount of funds are diverted. And the thing that I could find was the German government doing an investigation into the development funding that they were giving to Gaza. I didn't do as much of an investigation of the West Bank. I know there is a lot of corruption, but just in terms of Gaza, because that's like the biggest thing right now in terms of talking about money going to Gaza and then just being diverted by Hamas. And they were saying that those development funds were not diverted. So there are funds that are diverted, which are potentially from charitable organizations, that are from the fees that Hamas charges for smuggling through the southern border. Those are surely not going generally to enrich and improve the lives of Gazans. But the governmental development funds which is a very large portion of that, the investigations that have been done have shown that those have not been diverted. So this idea that all of the money that's going to Gaza is being diverted into terrorist
Oh, I didn't
activity
say
or
all. I did
sure.
not say all.
Um,
But yeah, but essentially it's Hamas. There's this funny trick because Hamas, what it does, it says, okay, we have a political wing and we have a government wing and we have a military wing. So it might be that the political wing takes the money and then it builds hospitals and it builds this jihadi indoctrination schools, and that counts as a school, so it doesn't count as diverted into the Al Qassam brigades. It's all like once you have a governing body that ideologically sees you as fodder to be sacrificed for the greater good of freeing Palestine, okay, it's so hard to make, because it would all be a matter of legal definitions. But at the end of the day, I don't think you need all that fancy data, because you can just look at the situation and you can say, well, these people have obviously lived very bad lives,
Yeah.
right? And
Right,
so where is all this money? Where is it?
Well, wait. So okay, so there's a number of pieces here that they put into play, and I'm trying to kind of sort these out. So
I'd like to add another thing, if I may.
Sure. Well,
I think the axiom of economic relief to the Gazans would be hard to defend today, because actually, is just a few weeks before the October 7th attacks, Israel has conceded some economic things to the Gazans, to keep Hamas calm. It was always a game of keeping it calm, the Qatari money, some economic concessions. And what Israel has discovered since then is that many of the workers who were permitted to move out of Gaza to work in Israel, so that they can bring money into Gaza, right? That's been like a long-term arrangement. They have actually been used as scouts to help the Nukhba forces of October 7th. So I think this today, going forward, this will become a problem. Like this axiom is going to be a problem.
So just starting at like baseline, and let's see where we can build a shared reality, and then where that diverges. So are the situation for people, just generally Gazans, normal people living their lives in Gaza, are the situations currently, or I'm saying currently, but like
before October 7th. Yeah, okay.
Was it the fact that they were living in pretty rough circumstances? Not talking about we can build up to why.
Okay. So compared to Israel, yes. Compared to much of the Islamic world, no. But normally we compare to what's right next to us. So psychologically, I would have to say yes.
So the level of unemployment is something like, I don't know, whatever, 40%. The fact that there's not constant electricity, the fact that there's lack of clean drinking water, the kind of basic like UN statistics that are looked at for seeing, how is the population doing? Do we agree that those were in poor shape? So not even getting into why, whose fault, but just
I agree with you if you're
reality.
comparing it. I agree with you if you're comparing it to Israel, to the Gulf states, or to the West in general. I don't agree with you if you compare it to the most of the Arab and Islamic world.
So what's like an example of another country that you would compare to that you think has like comparable statistics?
Probably Egypt.
Okay. And so the level, so like in Egypt, there's like blackouts, lack of electricity. There's like
no, but if you were like to look at in terms of GDP and of purchasing power and of life expectancy, that would be roughly comparable.
Okay, that's interesting. So if we have another conversation, maybe I'll have a chance to do that kind of analysis. I can look through that. So so you would say that the situation was not great, but it's more just like economically depressed, not
Look,
flourishing, but not really like that.
look, you have to say that it's really bad, because if the founding narrative of your society is that of suffering
Well,
and of being a victim,
I'm not asking. I'm not asking like Gaza or Hamas. I'm asking you, like, how would you characterize it?
no, I would characterize it as poor, right? I would really not want to live in Egypt, right? Okay, but I'm just saying that it's like, I guess I've kind of snuck a little bit in there. That's like, there are other places that if you were to want to say, well, because they're so poor and their lives are so terrible, there are more places with pretty terrible lives, like
yeah, I mean,
so the problem is the narrative. The problem is like the foundational narrative of the society, of like the reason why we're poor is because these people stole from us and they're living on our land. For example, I told you about this council that met about, well, what are we going to do with the Jews after we've done freeing Palestine, which will obviously happen in the next couple of years. Like that's how they saw it, like a year or two ago. They foresaw this, right? They foresaw this, but they thought they would win. So
just because we're doing this on the internet, I happen to have my computer in front of me, I was able to actually just quickly Google those things, and it looks like the Egypt unemployment rate something like 6.5%, maybe 6.7%, and the Gaza unemployment rate in like 2013 was like 80%.
That has to be fabricated. I have to okay. I grant you that I will not argue that the Gaza unemployment rate has to be higher than Egypt's for sure, but that has to be fabricated. That has to be manipulated somehow. Yeah. But again, I would agree with you that it has a high unemployment, stuff like that. I would also, it would also not surprise me.
Pretty much everywhere. Like I'm just scrolling through Reuters.
Okay, so what my theory would be, like, because it's impossible. You probably don't really have a society with 80% unemployment. What I have in my mind probably is that if you are employed for Hamas, it's it should be some kind of secret because the Israelis would target you. So you just sign as unemployed. It has to be some sort of manipulation. But I will grant you that the unemployment rate in Gaza is probably very, very high.
And like the food insecurity, something like 64%. What do you think
that sounds
in Egypt?
That's in Egypt, it's probably about around 15 or 20. But again, that sounds like it can't possibly be really the case.
So,
like, look at life expectancy, look at GDP. It's probably not.
Yes. So I think this is actually an interesting thing to focus on. Obviously, we're not going to resolve statistics. What's accurate, what's not, live right at this moment. But I think this is actually an interesting thing to highlight, which is that you see the material conditions of Gaza as not in accordance with what the kind of official statistics are. And I'm curious.
No, I think it depends on the statistics. It depends on what you can easily fabricate. I think it depends.
Okay.
I wouldn't argue with life expectancy.
But is there a conspiracy, Doran? I mean, Socrates.
No. It's not a conspiracy. It's just that these are like the government is run by an organization which benefits from portraying it as poor, and it is, and all the organizations are benefiting of it. Like take UNRWA, for example. UNRWA benefits from registering high food insecurity. That's how they get their funding.
So who do you believe? I mean, Socrates is pointing to some multitude of sources. You're saying they're all
I don't know. Like I will be.
What's the source of truth?
No, I didn't say that they're all incorrect. I said that I highly suspect these seem highly unlikely to me. But actually, I don't think it matters so much because I don't argue with the. Okay, I might argue with the material truth, but I don't argue with the psychological truth. And I think the psychological truth in this case is actually what matters.
Well, so can I actually dig into this because, so if it's the case that the material reality is really, really, really far away from what the psychological reality is. So in Gaza, people believe we're extremely pushed down. Our conditions are extremely poor, and obviously it's because it's Israel's fault. But just focusing on what the actual reality is. We're in such a terrible state. We're in the kind of circumstance that the UN would say, oh, this is like an extreme emergency just for this population and their living conditions. If people believe this about themselves,
wait, we're talking pre-October 7th, right?
Pre-October 7th.
Okay.
But it's actually not the case. They're actually, they're not in great circumstances. Their GDP isn't amazing, but it's not extreme. It's just, maybe kind of region consistent, but obviously much worse than Israel, which is one of the startup capitals of the world. They have a lot of, I've even done some collaborations with biotech in companies that I worked at. Then you would say, well, a very reasonable understanding of why that could be the case is they're massively propagandized by their own population. There's these Hamas schools that are teaching them not only is it Israel's fault, but things are really bad right here.
I don't even know if I should call it propaganda by this point. Maybe because now it's like this. It's a foundational narrative.
Exactly. Yeah, we are victims. We're in dire circumstances. But if it were the case that the material reality actually literally matches, it's these statistics, like what the true values are, not the official what's written down, or there's some little technical thing that we can say this when it's not really the fact of the matter. If those things actually did match, then whatever those specific things, okay, maybe this is Israel's fault, but you don't see it that way. Those things might be different. But in terms of the material reality, we are these people who live in these circumstances. If that were actually true, then that form of whatever that narrative is would actually not be a kind of self-victimization. That would simply be just an objective view of reality, right? That's everything I've said is just logically consistent, right? I haven't said anything.
Well, I don't think there's such a thing as an objective view of reality, but
sure.
But I agree.
Yeah.
Mostly broadly, I would agree with you. But I think that in order to, so what I would need to do to debunk your argument is to try to argue that you can't, like, maybe the dispossession is not the poor state of your lives is not the reason for your regression.
Of course.
Right? And to show that, I will need to imagine a hypothetical world in which there was not this, poor state of affairs, but you would still be aggressive. And as we've said before, I can imagine such a world because it happened.
Of course. So so you could shift what the status of the argument is and say, okay, maybe it is a fact that you are living in these conditions, but these conditions are a result of other things. It's not persecution, it's not victimization, or you would be aggressive even if your conditions were good.
Exactly.
You could make all those arguments, but sticking on the argument that you've made right now, that there's this narrative, this self-victimization narrative that says things are worse than they are. If that were actually not the case, would that affect anything about how you see that population of people? If it turned out that what you saw as self-victimization, narrative, self-brainwashing, brainwashing from Hamas, whatever that is, that's actually, they're actually right in terms of where their circumstances are, maybe not how they happened or whose fault, but what their circumstances are. Would that change anything for you if it turned out?
So here's the thing.
True?
Here's the thing. I'll answer with a philosophical observation. Let's call it that. Okay. So basically, you can have several types of narratives in society. If you were to take, you can have this situation, and let's say that everything is 100% correct. There's 80% unemployment. Everyone suffers. Everything sucks. Okay. Worst possible thing. It still doesn't have to make you resist, because you could have this narrative overarching narrative that says we resist, therefore we are, right? That's basically kind of the Palestinian narrative. And you could have this, kind of this, this is not a religious argument. I'm just giving you an example. You could have like the ancient Hebrew narrative, which says we've done something wrong. The reason that this happened to us, the reason that the temple was destroyed, is because we as a society have sinned against God. We did something wrong. Sure. We need to do something different, right? So I would argue that like the question is, even if it were as bad as you've described and worse, it still doesn't have to be like, you could build up. But once you're so focused on what other people have done to me, right? You will never get out of it. And by the way, the Palestinian reformers, the minority of voices that we're starting to hear, this is exactly what these people are saying. They're saying we've acted absolutely crazy. Okay? And of course, even with these people, I imagine that Israel, even if these people were one day to be in power and this would be the majority of Palestinian society, Israel would probably still have to make painful concessions. It wouldn't solve the problem, absolutely, but it would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally this is a good life perspective to say, to self-reflect, say, what have I done wrong? What can I do different in the future? Although there is a certain irony that you've said basically that Israel is not responsible generally for these circumstances, or to the degree that they're responsible, their actions were justified. And right now there's nothing really proactively that they can do. They can hope maybe there's some vague way, maybe there's some.
But they were doing pre-October 7th. They were reaching economic. There were economic deals being signed. The Gazans were going into Israel to work. The Qatari funds that went into Gaza. These were all part of this overarching Israeli conception that only if the economic conditions, if only these were better, then the Gazans would maybe be more peaceful and it would be easier. Hamas would have no need to assault Israel, and it would be, you could contain it and kind of live side by side with it. So that was like the conception, and that kind of broke on October 7th. But it's not that I believe that all Palestinians should live in absolute poverty. I don't think so at all. But I do. Okay, so you need to have a partner who would not, who you could build up, right? So that's a huge challenge, But I think, as I've said, I think that's what Netanyahu was trying to do. He would never have said that. But I think that was like the overarching grand move with the Saudis and all that. I think that's what was brewing behind the scenes. But I guess now we might not know, at least until the archives are open in a few dozen years.
So, I mean, what do you think in terms of, so now moving to the West Bank, so situations in Gaza have potentially material problems, and obviously something like 50% of the population of Gaza are under 18, and the blockade, the restriction of movement, has been in place for about 18 years. So about half the population has never had the opportunity to leave this exact area that they were born in. Things are less restrictive in the West Bank. Material conditions are better. You're correct that there's a lot of corruption in the government. There's a lot of inefficiency, but it is a fact that so it's like, for people who haven't done this, pull up a map of the West Bank, look at the areas, the zones A, B, and C, and you see what are these little islands that are forming that are Palestinian-controlled areas. And then to get from one, if your grandma's house is in a different region, then you have to cross a military checkpoint. getting searched by the military, and more settlements are being built and more walls are being pushed in. I think if I were in that circumstance, so I'm an American, I've known freedom all my life. I don't have I didn't go to a Hamas school. I'm Jewish. I don't have I certainly don't have a propagandized view of what, life is like or what Israel is like or whatever. But I can imagine if I were living in a region with a military enforced fence around me, that these restrictions are growing year after year after year, decade after decade. These islands are growing smaller and more separated from each other, that are regions that I have some real freedom as a person. I can't imagine not feeling like me and my people are being strangled out of their homes, right? That's a very human feeling, isn't it? That's not simply like a narrative, right?
Sure, but it's, again, it kind of feeds into itself in a sense, right? Because the reason why you have all these restrictions that are getting worse is because the Israelis also feel like there's a constant threat coming from these Palestinian
no, that's not true, because the settlements that are being built are people who are very religious, who feel the need to expand Israel's territory and to be kind of frontiersmen, right? Who feel the need to move into this
pioneers.
Pioneers, exactly right. They feel the need to extend Israel's territory, and so they build a settlement. Some of these are deemed illegal by Israel. They're all illegal under international law, but Israel deems some of these outposts, so they're non-official settlements.
Yeah.
Some of these they say, okay, that's illegal. You guys have to leave, and they demolish them. And some of these officially become settlements, so they're recognized by Israel. They say, yep, this is your land, and also will send the army to defend you. So if you have some back and forth, there's Israeli settlers shooting at Palestinians who are living there. If the Palestinians, shoot back or throw rocks back, the settlers have the military on their side. This is not a security checkpoint. So like, the Golan Heights or something, you could say, okay, we've got a military border here. We want to add a buffer zone. This is not a buffer zone. This is people who want to take land and extend Israel's borders.
So we've actually discussed this before in this discussion, right? I've talked about how people see this as a security, as something that is actually making Israel more secure. There's also a religious argument, which I won't make because I believe in making secular arguments. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing: I'm actually, I don't feel like I'm good enough at defending the settlements. So I don't want to bash them without being good enough at defending them, because I like, when I bash something, I like to be good at defending it to make sure that it's bash worthy. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to take a stance on either side here.
If you could give an opinion and then I'll promise not to dig down further, so not to double down on bashing, to give you the opportunity to just give whatever your frank kind of personal opinion is, not to say this is a perfect evaluation or analysis, but just how you feel about the settlement.
I'll give you an impression, not an opinion, mm-hmm. because I don't feel like I have to have an opinion about everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So my impression is that the settlements are probably important for security, because at the end of the day, when you hold land just militarily, eventually you'll pull out and you'll get terror nests. That's what you've had in Gaza. That's what you've had in Lebanon. So essentially, I do believe that there is an aspect of security here. Okay. On the other hand, I don't like the friction between the populations at all. And I don't like it when there are illegal assaults on Palestinians and when people take their law into their own hands. However, I also believe that the Palestinians aren't as, 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 well, aren't as innocent in these occasions as they're portrayed. Let's put it like that. So yeah, I don't like. I'm kind of, I can see kind of both ways here. I'm not very strongly convinced one way or the other. I do think that Israel should have control of that territory. It should have some of the cities. I think the Gaza experiment was an important one as what happens when you pull out. But I think that, like, if there was a way to improve Palestinian lives in the West Bank, and they would not be a threat to the Israelis, I would be perfectly happy with that.
Mm-hmm. So when you say there should be,
by the way, time, like, I'm really running late.
I promised you, Doran. So you want this to be Doran? I mean, the thing is, Doran, like, we started late, and then the technical issues.
But that's why we gave some extra.
Yeah.
So maybe final statements.
Yeah.
Final statements.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So do this again, Jake, so we can have this in recording, right?
Okay. So let's just give final statements.
Should I go first? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, Socrates, you were saying something, so I cut you off.
I was actually gonna ask a question, so that was gonna slightly extend. But I mean, I'll say
this ends when Doran hangs up on us, basically.
so I was just gonna say, if you could explain. So you mentioned that Israel or Israelis should create settlements in the West Bank.
It's an impression. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. It seems to me like they should. I'm not very strongly there, but I think I think it seems like probably some measure of that is a good idea.
Mm-hmm. So I was just going to ask if you could give like a really general like idea of how much. So like what proportion of the West Bank should additionally, so that's currently like zone, right? C is Palestine.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm actually
zone C.
I'm actually not going to answer the question in the way that you've asked me to. I'll try to answer it differently. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that the settlers should be law-abiding citizens of the state of Israel. Mm. That means that you're not allowed to go and start an illegal settlement. You do what the state allows you to do, okay? And you're not allowed to go and bother Palestinians, okay? So that's basically like I don't want to answer in proportion of territory. Mm-hmm. I want to answer as general law keeping, because if you do not abide by the law, that means to me that you might not be a good player for my team, and you're just getting me in trouble. Okay, but if you abide by the law, like, I'll start with that. Maybe then we can discuss territory, because I really don't have an answer to your question.
But so as happens pretty regularly, these outposts are formed and they're illegal at the point that they're formed, but then they become recognized legally as settlements. Is that something that you now see it as this is acceptable or good because now it's legal, or you see it as this is something that causes friction? So they, even though it's now legal, it's within the Israeli framework.
I would prefer to not have illegal, illegal per Israeli law. Okay, I would prefer not to have illegal settlements start at all. But I'm also not that qualified to give you that answer, because I might look up some settlements which I see today as fundamental parts of Israel, and discover that they were illegal at the start. But I doubt that, though, because Israel was pushing for some of the early settlements. Places like Modi'in Illit and Ariel, and the big settlements. But yeah,
and then I have like one final. I think this will be pretty brief question, which is just so the founding of those settlements. And if you want to split it up into the ones that are founded starting fully legal, or the ones that start as outposts and then become settlements.
I don't have enough background about that. So
just,
I can't really...
The question is, so my impression of what you've said is that these settlements increase security. They possibly induce friction, or in certain circumstances induce friction, which is probably counter to peace and counter to justice and well-being, and maybe morally wrong. But that overall the settlements are not a major factor in terms of making relations really bad, or they're not one of the top contributing factors.
Okay, they are, but also they aren't. Like because if you were to ask a Palestinian living in the West Bank, he would absolutely 100% list this at top 3 at least. Okay, but again, if I were so let's imagine a world without settlements, but you still get this. We've been there, so it's a kind of a tricky question to answer.
So they are a factor. They're probably overstated by Palestinians in terms of how much of a factor versus what their true impact versus other factors.
Yeah, probably. But I do agree that I don't know that much about it. As I've said, I do know, but I don't feel comfortable bashing it either way. Like I can give you like a balanced perspective. I can see some points in here and points there. So yeah.
Okay.
That's what
I said that would be my final question. So let me keep my word and
thanks, guys. Let me end this recording really quick. How do I do this? Manage recording.
Did you want to do a quick final statement or?
Oh, I mean, thank you.
I mean, for Doran and I, if there's just one like takeaway that we want to give.
Sure, I can go first. So, Jake, do you want to ask me for the recording?
Yeah, Doran, any final statements?
Okay, so actually, I thought it was a pretty good discussion. It was a pretty good faith. We've had, I think, we genuinely had to think, and when you have to think, it means it's not boring. We didn't just regurgitate historical narratives at each other. I think that's a good thing. So yeah, I think it was a good debate, a good discussion, and I don't really have anything to add. I think we've spoken on quite a few topics.
How about you, Socrates?
Yeah, I enjoyed this discussion a lot. This felt pretty genuine in terms of trying to give personal perspective rather than, as you said, kind of regurgitating talking points, which I really appreciated. I think just on the topic as a whole, I think this was good for me to see. I think it highlighted the degree to which actual fact of the matter over material conditions is a real disparate view and something that mistrust over official statistics and what the fact of the matter is in different circumstances, I think is something that comes into play probably more than we give it credit for. That's something that's worth putting time into, of really trying to nail down one way or another what the fact of the matter is. For me overall on this topic, I have for myself wide divergences versus what the popular narratives are, which is that people are generally pro-Israel or pro-Palestine or anti-Israel or anti-Palestine. For me, it breaks down more into people who are exclusive in who they relate to. So for me, I relate to Israelis and Palestinians. I see the state of Israel as a state that I relate to in the sense that it's claimed itself as a Jewish state and represents itself as a Jewish state in the world. It's a state that my grandparents were very, very heavily invested in terms of they cared about it very deeply. That generation of Jews has very, very strong feelings about the existence and continued existence of Israel. And at the same time, I have a very strong relation to the Palestinians who are suffering under what I see as a a state that is subjugating and victimizing these large groups of people for for concerns other than security. At every given moment, there are security concerns, but the overall flow of the development of the Israeli state is not one that has been primarily focused on security. It's been focused on control. It's been focused on land grabs. It's been focused on pandering to extreme elements within Israeli society and allowing them to do things that harm all of Israeli society. And I think that Israel is seeing itself more and more separated from the rest of the world. And in order to not become a pariah state, and in order to be, I think, the shining example that it wants to be and represents itself as in the world of a human rights democracy, I think it needs to make really drastic changes. But I see with its current political process with Netanyahu, with the extremists he surrounded himself with, a really dark turn that I really hope Israel can reform and can go in another direction and can be a state that people don't have a reason to have this kind of animosity feeling toward, that it can be better. So that's my not so concise closing thoughts.
All right. Thanks, guys. I'm ending the recording. And boom, there we go. Sorry, Doran, we went over so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I gotta take a
for
piss.
staying over. I really appreciate it.
I gotta pee.
Okay.